Hi, welcome to the TNT Creates channel. Today I'm going to do my first video, so bear with me guys. But today I'm going to show you how to make this really cool glass tile sign with a really neat etched background and the fun name on the front. For this project you will need some armor etch. You can get this on Amazon, I'll put the link below. I think they also carry it at some local stores. You'll need a permanent vinyl, any color of your choice. This one's a nice pretty blue. And then you'll need a tile. I recommend a glass subway tile that has a little bit of color, because the ones that are white you just don't see the etching as well, but you can totally use white. Doesn't matter what size, it's totally up to you. And without further ado, let's get started on making these great tiles. First I'll start with the background, enter the text that we want. You'll choose the font. I'm using Butchery Block. It's a paid font, but you can use any heavy text bolded font. Once you have your font in, you'll want to change your letter spacing and your size. I'm going to unlock the lock and set the width to 11.5 because my tile is 12 inches and I do a ½ inch around. And I'm going to do 3.5 for the same reason. And then you might want to adjust your letter spacing a little. You can also unhook these if you want and move them around according to how you like them. Then I'm going to bring in, I made my font graphic in another program because they don't play, Design Space doesn't play nice with the font that I used, so I made it in Illustrator and then I'm going to bring it in as an image. You could make it in any program that you choose to use, and then I just double check that the length is what I want it to be. This one I leave locked because I don't want it to warp, and I just change it to the size that I want. Once it's on the canvas, just want to make sure that I weld this because sometimes it comes in weird. And then we're going to go over to Make It. And then I cut my vinyl to the right lengths, so since this one is 12 by 4, we'll cut my vinyl to that. And this one fits in the 2 boxes, so we'll cut a 2" by 12" piece of vinyl for this one. I like to just do everything on one mat. You can do it on 2 different mats if you'd like. Okay, so now we're going to cut our material. For the background image, it's going to be a stencil, so it doesn't matter what it looks like. I just have this like clearance stuff that I'll never use because I don't really care for the pattern. So you can just use that, or you can use stencil vinyl, or just any vinyl you have lying around, doesn't really matter. I'm using the Cricut cutting mat here. I've already measured out on my board that I need 4 squares, which is 4 inches. So I just line this up with the 0 to 4. I use my big old ruler here to make a nice straight line. And then I have an X-Acto knife. And I just cut a nice big strip right through. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but it's nice to be mostly cut. And then for the foreground, you want to use a permanent vinyl. It doesn't matter what color. I got this really cool, pretty blue color from my mystery box, so I'm going to just use that. It takes up 2 inches, so I'm just going to place it on my mat. And I'll place my ruler at the 2-inch mark. And then we're going to cut. Whoops. You better if you cut a straight line, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. Make sure it pulls away. And now we're going to put it on our mat. I just use the light grip mat when I'm using regular vinyl. Take the top off. My mat is very dirty, don't mind that. And then you want to make sure, if you're going to do this method, that your vinyl lines up with how you laid it out on your mat. So I have my background in the first 4 squares, so I'm going to line it up with the top line and the first 4 squares. And you want to make sure that the Cricut can see the edge of the mat here. So we'll just get that on there. Perfect. And then I have my color between the 4th and the 6th. So I'm just going to line that up to the bottom as best I can. It doesn't matter if it's exactly right because I've got a little bit of wiggle room. This way I can cut them both at the same time. I don't have to use 2 different mats. So my mat looks like this, 1 to 4, and then the blue goes from 4 to 6. And in design space, you can see the same thing. I have the love from 1 to 4, and then the space here from 4 to 6. And you are ready to cut. Okay, we are now ready to cut. So we're going to head over to the Make It button. Click Continue. I'm using my Cricut via Bluetooth. I just turned on my machine, so it'll take a second for my machine to find itself. Once it's connected, I've got my vinyl saved as my favorite one, so I'm going to choose vinyl. The default pressure seems to work fine for me. Then we are ready to move over to the system here. You want to line up your mat, and then we're going to load it in. And then we'll hit Cricut to make it, and we're going to let it cut. Alright, so your pieces are all cut. You have your 2 pieces here. The bigger one, remember, is going to be a stencil, so you want to make sure you weed it with the removing what you want to be etched. So I actually find that this is pretty easy to do with my hands since it's so big. So you're removing the letters and leaving the background. So you just start pulling them off like so. Alright, and that one's all done. And then your foreground, you want to weed like you normally would weed. So you just want to pull it off. I usually, when I have these long ones, I like to just tear the top from the bottom, just so that I don't have to worry about weeding it. So then I just pull the bottom, and then you can slowly start pulling. Just make sure it doesn't pull up any of the letters. Like if you've got a Y or something on the bottom, sometimes they like to stick. I just like to pull it right along the bottom very carefully. And then again, I just tear off the end. And then I'll do the same with the top. Depending on the intricacy of the name, you might find it sticks more than other times. And then you want to weed out all the little pieces. Alright, and then that one's all ready to go. Next we will start etching. Now that you have your stencil weeded, you're going to want to transfer it to your tile. So what you're going to want to do is, I just use painter's tape. You could use transfer tape or whatever else you would like to use. I like to try and line the painter's tape up as best I can with the top of the design so that it's kind of straight. And then I usually leave just a little bit of the bottom showing, just so you can see where you are lining up. the bottom. It doesn't have to be perfect because all they're really holding in place is the center of the O and making it a little bit more grab friendly. Then you just want to take the backing off. Very carefully. Should come off pretty easily since it's such a big piece. And then you want to take your tile. And then this part's a little tricky. You want to line it up as best you can and center it as best you can. I usually find the very edges, and I try to get them just about where I want it. Without it sticking, which can be very difficult. And then once you have it where you want to try and smooth it out before it sticks too much. And then you want to smooth it all out. You don't want any folds in your vinyl, especially on the edges, because if you have folds, then it will make a weird blur on the etching cream. If you get one, usually you can just kind of give it a little love and it'll come right out. It doesn't have to be bubble free on the edge as long as it's on the edge of your design. Right, and then you want to carefully, without tearing the edges, you want to go over the edges as best that you can. Just make sure everybody's in. If you've got access, you can just let it fold over the side. And then just gently push down, making sure you're getting all of the edges as flat as you can get them. I also like to once you have it in place, I like to let it sit for at least 5 minutes because the sticky part of the vinyl will start to stick a little bit better after it's been sitting for a few minutes. Alright, so we'll let this sit and I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, now that this is set for a few minutes, you're ready to etch. You're going to need a paintbrush or a sponge brush if you prefer. They highly recommend you wear gloves when you're playing with this armor etch because it is a chemical. I also recommend eye gear, and this is what I'm using. It's called Armor Etch. I have a little tiny bottle. It's lasted me for many projects, so I wouldn't worry too much about getting a giant bottle. You can also put it back on once we're done. So what I do is I brush one direction and I try to keep it to the stencil as much as possible. If you want to tape off parts of it, you can. I didn't in this case, but just know that if it touches anything other than the stencil or the glass or any of the other sides of the glass or anything, it will etch everything it touches. So if you don't want it to be on the sides, you might want to tape it off or just be very careful when you're placing it. I always do one small layer and I paint one direction. It doesn't need to be super thick to do the job, but you want to make sure it's an even layer so it doesn't get patchy. So once I've gone one direction, I just make sure it's not spotty in any place. There's nowhere that looks especially clear. And then I let it sit for about 2 minutes. And then we'll paint in the other direction. Now we'll go ahead and paint in the other direction that we went. You can let it sit a little bit longer than I did. I usually let it sit just a tad longer, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go this other direction. This just ensures that there's no gapping or weird spacing. The bottle will say to let it sit for no more than 3 minutes, I believe, but I have found that that is very light etching, and I'm not a fan of the results. I like to let it sit for at least 15 minutes. Sometimes I let it sit a little bit longer. Doesn't seem to hurt it to sit longer. This glass is pretty durable. You definitely want to make sure you've got a good amount on here. And now we're going to let it sit, like I said, probably at least 15 minutes, probably let it sit a little bit longer, and I will show you how to take it off once we're done. Okay, now that your etching cream has had time to sit, you're going to want to rinse it off. You could do it in the sink or wherever you like. I like to just use my hose on the jet setting just because I feel like it gets it off. You want to make sure you get all of it off. You don't want anything left over. Just spray it off. You can leave the vinyl right on it. You can double check the edges and the sides, just make sure you don't have any residual on there since it is a chemical. Once you're sure it's all off, you're ready to take the stencil off. Alright, now that your item's all rinsed off, you just want to take the stencil off. And it might come off in pieces, you might have to kind of pick at it, but you'll just tear it off. Once it's all off, you'll see the design kind of starts to come through. It won't show as bright until it's fully dry, but you can kind of see a little bit of the design coming through already. Okay, so now you just want to take a nice microfiber cloth or something, whatever you can, to just make sure it's as dry as it possibly can be. You don't want it to have any liquid left on it when you place your design. And you are almost done. So you'll see now that it's dry, you can see a lot more of the pattern, and in certain lights you'll actually see a shadow, which is pretty cool. So you want to let that dry as best you can. While I let that dry, we'll prep our top design. So our top design, we'll just take a piece of transfer tape or painter's tape. I like my painter's tape. This one you don't want to have the excess on, so I just place that right as centered as possible. Some people don't like painter's tape because you can't see through it. I don't find that that's that much of a problem. I can see it pretty okay. You're more than welcome to use whatever transfer material you like. Burnish it good. And remove the backing very carefully, especially on the big heart. If you're using the lovely Melody font, it has a tendency to like to climb up. We don't want that. Okay. Now once you're sure that your tile is 100% dry, all you're going to do is take your design. I usually put my finger on the very end of one side and then the very end of the other, so I kind of know where the ends are. And then you just find the center wherever you like that to be. You want to line it up as best as possible, and you just place it. Run your fingers along the edges there. Painter's tip, you don't have to burnish too bad, but just go ahead and give it a nice little slide there, and then we'll just go ahead and remove the tape. Alright, so now you can see that you have the nice tile with the cool etched glass in the back, and the names are on the front. You kind of see that my etching is a little spotty in a couple of spots. You definitely want to make sure there's no extra spots. I used a kind of dry brush when I first started, and it didn't work as well as I liked. So I recommend you making sure it's a new clean brush. And then if there's little bubbles inside your smaller fonts, as it sits, they should work themselves out, but you can always take your tool and kind of flatten them out just a little bit more. Just do it gently so it doesn't tear up or bring up the edges of your vinyl. And then you'll see the little plate stands that I bought on Amazon on the blog. I'll put a link to those down there. Those are a fun way to display these. And there you have it. Your tiles are all set to go. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more fun projects coming up. Thanks.